Hi, welcome to the Microsoft Partner Showcase. I'm Brian Hitney, a cloud solution architect at Microsoft focused on data and analytics. We frequently talk about data governance and data management from a software perspective, but what about the people, the processes, and the frameworks involved with data management? How do you know if your data management is efficient, and where do you start if you don't have any data governance at all? That's where the EDM Council, and specifically their CDMC or Cloud Data Management Capabilities Framework, comes into play. I had the opportunity to discuss the EDM Council and the CDMC with Mike Meriton, the co founder and COO of the EDM Council. Mike has an impressive executive background prior to co founding the EDM Council, and he walks us through what the Council does and introduces us to the key controls of the CDMC framework. Stay tuned at the end for references, a link to an upcoming webcast, and other resources. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Hitney. I'm a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Mike Meriton from the EDM Council. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. Happy to be here.
Data governance and data management best practices been growing as a topic of importance for so many organizations. So there's a lot of ground that we can cover with that, but I think the best place to start would be asking you if you could give an introduction and talk a little bit about the EDM Council, what it is, how it got started, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, first of all, Brian, thank you for having me here and happy to speak to these topics. And as you know, we all have to stay tuned because things are moving very quick in the marketplace. And this is an evolving area. But a little bit about the EDM Council. So for those that may not be aware, we're the Global Trade Association. We're a nonprofit and we're dedicated to data and analytics professionals. A little bit about the bioscience of the EDM Council. We've been operating now for 18 years. We are operating in all of the major geographic theaters. It's over 350 companies and 25,000 professionals across all of the different roles in data and analytics management. So Brian, you mentioned data governance, absolutely data governance, data storage, data architecture, metadata management. I mean, the cool part about data is that the roles and opportunities have grown significantly and exponentially. We're the trade association for everyone involved in those roles. Now, a little bit about how we go to market. And I always like to think when I speak to organizations, what makes them different? Or, the other phrase is, what's your special sauce? And for us, it's the first is we do believe in a responsible data-driven organization and establishing data literacy for all. And that was recently updated about a couple of years ago. And here's why. Our original principle was the responsible data-driven organization, but we realized it's vital for the data and analytic teams to help the rest of the company leverage data in each of their jobs and in roles. And so we felt that that's really the ultimate mission, is that companies that are data-driven and have data cultures, we've actually had this measured in reports and in data ROI. They're often 2 or 3x the market cap of companies that are not data driven and what they do day to day. So it really translates to the bottom line. And then finally, we're neutral. We're a absolute neutral nonprofit. So regulators in different industries and companies that compete with each other, they all drop the competitive swords and they sit at the table of neutrality. And through that, we build collaboratively best practices and standards to attack some of those wicked, problems. Now, a little bit about the members of the council. It's not an exhaustive list. Of course, Microsoft on the list. But if you look at the left, we started in the financial markets because that's where the very first CDOs were appointed in 2005, back when we were formed. Then you'll see in the middle of the page the large digital organizations, and I put Microsoft there, of course, along with Google and Amazon and others. We did work on this cloud framework, which we're going to talk about, that significantly added to the digital presence of companies being part of our organization. And we're very proud to have Microsoft as a board member of the council. And then you'll see all of these other industry leading companies, Johnson & Johnson, one of the largest, if not the largest, in the pharmaceutical and healthcare space. You also see Novartis and telecommunications. It's Verizon, British Telecom, and others. And you'll see market leaders across all segments. So part of our journey is, though we started in financial markets, today we have all sectors are involved with the EDM Council. And you may ask, what do we do? 6 things. One is we help companies with best practices. In fact, Brian, our discussion today about the CDMC, or Cloud Data Management Capability Framework, is us working with a bunch of practitioners across industry to build a highly useful framework that would establish a series of both governance and data risk controls so that you could really hyperscale your cloud environment. So that's an example of a best practice. We do data standards. We actually support several industry ontologies for the financial industry, for the pharmaceutical industry, and more. And we believe standards do create efficiencies in the market. The other thing is that since the data profession is a newer profession, it's very difficult to find training in university from, to be a data governance professional or to be a data steward. So we have upwards of 8 or so training tracks and 50 different training programs. They're all certification, which means exam-based. So companies can help upskill their data teams that often are only learning from the job but haven't had professional training. So we feel that's a big need for us to help the industry with that. And we do research and benchmarking. As mentioned, regulators are part of our membership because they too have data programs. They too, in their supervisory responsibilities, data is a big part of how they conduct their oversight in various markets. And then finally, we network people together because we realize at the end, no one company has fully solved or hit the top of the mountain on data and analytics management. And the journey is a little bit easier if everyone shares along the way some of their lessons learned, both mistakes and the good things they've done, so that the journey is easier. So that gives you a general sense, 350 plus and growing, 25,000 professionals. And we do encourage people that if they'd like to learn more about us, just reach out. We're your nonprofit. We're certainly happy to have companies join in as be part of the membership. So that tells you a little bit about us.
You mentioned that this was really started in the financial services industry, but it's amazing how much it's grown and how much it applies. And what do you attribute to some of that, right? Because you see the importance of these kinds of controls in healthcare, in manufacturing, and retail. So you've had a lot of success there. What do you attribute to some of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a personal philosophy view that often humans don't change until there's what motivates people, pain or joy, and often pain makes people move faster. And when things don't go right, they are motivated to act. So a lot of why it started in financial markets, if you wind the clock back to that time frame, it's very close in proximity to the financial crisis of 2008. So a lot of these firms realized that what brought the financial markets down worldwide was a data management issue. And therefore, regulators picked up on this and started to create regulation that said, if we're going to work with financial companies, we need to trust that their capital adequacy and the reports that says how much money should you have in a bank to be solvent during a crisis. The regulators were actually worried that based on what happened in 2008, that they couldn't trust the end reports. So a CDO became necessary because there needed to be someone who was responsible for aggregating the data that would be necessary to send in regulatory reports where regulators could feel confident that the systemic risk of a marketplace wouldn't have a crisis like this again. So that's why it started there. But if you move the needle forward into 2010, 2012, 2015, you then started to see companies now in different sectors and countries starting to pass data privacy laws. And those laws weren't isolated to only the financial markets. So if you look at the passage in 2018 of GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union, it's sort of the high watermark on very extensive regulation on protecting sensitive data across all companies and all markets. Then companies began to realize that, wow, we too, if we're a manufacturer, we too, a retailer, if it's personal health information, this now needs to be protected. And other countries and other states in the US have passed similar type of laws. So the idea of data protection now is no longer limited to your bank account and what stocks you're trading. It gets into your personal health information, your personal data, and any company needs to be protected. So Brian, that drove the original version 1 of a CDO. I'll add one piece to it. The next thing that came along is companies realized the better we are at data management, the better not only can we protect at the downside of risk, but the better we are in serving our customers. So it's at the heart of revenue generation, improved operations, and more. So CDOs today are serving all of those needs, meaning better data means better risk management, better serving your customer, better creating efficiencies in your operation. So that's why the role has grown so significantly, and the membership of the council is a reflection of the growth of that role across all industries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there seems to be, in my experience, two competing challenges in organizations. One is to secure the data and to minimize risk of data, but the other is to empower all of the users in the organization to be more productive, to do more with the data, to explore the data and get value out of that data. And I'm not suggesting that they're necessarily opposite, but is that, do you see that struggle with organizations too about?
It is the quintessential struggle. And thank you for framing it, because, it's the yin and yang, right? You sort of need to do both, right? You can't just protect data. You can't just lock it down and not use it. Then it's not serving, your stakeholders, whether it's shareholders, customers, supply chain providers. On the other hand, if you have no controls of your data and you use it freely and there's no protections, then the risk you're running is that inadvertently there'll be data breaches. And that runs reputational risks, there's financial risks, there's quite a few risks that are involved along the way. So I think what we're all about, and where we're seeing this, and this where it has come in with part of this CDMC framework, which is the first thing you need to do is assure your data at the most granular level is protected and it's available for the right use cases. And then you can then federate your access to data with data products and architectures like data mesh, so that business people are enabled to use data in everything they do, every business decision they make, every serving the customer opportunity. But if the data is properly protected at a granular level, people won't inadvertently create a scenario that creates risk for their organization and for them. So that's the the yin and yang of this debate. It is solvable, but it's only solvable if you have a proper data risk control framework in place. And that's what led to the innovation around the CDMC framework. That's, in fact, that question, Brian, set up why the CDMC was something all these companies wanted to work on together to solve that exact question.
Let's dive into the CDMC a little bit more then and talk about that process, because I know it was something that was worked on for many years, had a lot of contributors across many industries and companies. And for those who aren't aware of what it is, let's learn a little bit more about it.
Great, and happy to share it. It's what I call a lifetime story, and I think everyone will appreciate that in a couple of minutes as I just walk through what happened. So, I'll put this framing up, right, that there's some very serious things you got to think about when you want to scale into public cloud and leverage that. It has phenomenal opportunity. You can attack data sources many times bigger than you could ever contemplate inside of your own operating environment. The idea of pay on demand for what you need in compute power without buying a lot of servers that just sit idly, that's another huge benefit. There's just phenomenal benefits of using cloud. But on the downside, there are regulatory mandates, especially for mid and large size firms, that say you need to safeguard your cloud computing assets. There's also an inefficiency. If different teams in a company are working on different parts of this, it's highly ineffective if the teams are operating in silos. So if your CTO is a little bit independent from what your chief security officer versus your risk teams versus your compliance functions, and importantly, the chief data officer aren't in the same room working off a common blueprint, this is an area that becomes difficult. And if you're building a control framework, if every company has to build it themselves, especially if you'll see 89% of companies are using 2 or more public cloud providers. So these are big challenges. So we were approached about 3 years ago at the beginning. Ironically, it was around the time when the pandemic kicked off in early 2020. And a group of companies came to us saying, hey, we know you have frameworks at the EDM Council. We have one called DCAM that 60% of our members, including regulators, is using. It's all about data management in general, best practices. Why don't we come up with a group of companies to hammer out a series of principles, best practices, and eventually controls and automations for establishing a comprehensive data risk control framework? And we said, well, we'll be happy to do it. It can't be just one cloud company, and it can't just be one or two market representatives. We need to at least have 10 companies and at least more than one cloud company who would work on it. And to our surprise, in the course of about 60 to 90 days, in March up to about May, June, when we kicked off in 2020, we had 100 companies get involved. And you'll see some of them, on the left side. We ended up covering all industries over the course of a 2-year period. The major cloud companies, absolutely, Microsoft was a leader in this, but they were joined, and all were joined by IBM Cloud, Google Cloud, and AWS, and other tech firms like Calibra, Snowflake, Informatica. And then as we were building this framework, and I'll share with you, it was 750 meetings over a year and a half to 2 years, 45,000 hours of work, and the average meeting had 30 or 40 people. And then we did agile smaller groups to work on this intra-week. So phenomenal effort to do this. But as we were building it, then you'll see under the regulators, we started briefing financial regulators and then other regulators so that we made sure that what was being built would stand up to their supervisory functions. And then finally, we wanted to make sure it was more than just a framework. There'd be training for it, there'd be certification programs for it, and more. And what resulted, Brian, after that, very lengthy effort, and kudos, by the way, to the Microsoft team and the others, because you all sat in the room right across from people that in the cloud world, whether it's AWS or Google, all of you all compete, to offer the best offerings, but you all figured that sitting at this common table would be good for everyone. And that's a testimony to the company. And we were really very proud of that occurred. This is the end result. It's a 160-page document. You'll see the high-level overview. Of course, we had to make it a picture of a cloud, right? And it has 6 components in it. First, and importantly, starting with governance and accountability. And in that, also the business case and the business drivers for cloud as well. There, it had a principle that said anything and everything ingested into cloud needs to be cataloged and classified. And if it isn't, it needs to be immediately treated as highly sensitive data and fully encrypted. Then if you do the catalog and classification properly, it sets up your accessibility and usage rights. It'll then also feed in directly to the protection and privacy issues of that data, what encryption level should be established, how secure must that data be made based on its sensitivity level. And then you have to track data from ingestion to any transformation and ultimately to be retired and archived subject to archiving requirements of companies, subject to local and jurisdictional laws and more, and what your business policies are. And then all of this sits on top of a data and technical architecture. So it follows a comprehensive view. It's not just security, it's not just risk, it's not just governance, it's all of these pieces have to be brought together in order to have a trusted, scalable cloud environment to protect data at all stages of its life cycle. Now, on top of that, and I sort of consider this the bullseye of the framework, is the team identified 14 controls and automations that were designed to be automated and protect data across all of this life cycle. In fact, you'll see that these controls correlate to the 6 components of the framework. In fact, 4 of them are correlated to the governance and accountability. You'll see, data cataloging and classification obviously maps to that component. And it goes around the full life cycle, including quality measurement, data lineage, cost metrics. This was a debate in the room. Of course, if we're using cloud, we need to have mechanisms to track our cloud usage that then correlates to our investments into the use of our cloud. So this was another vital point that these controls all need to work together. Now, I'll pause for a moment and I'll point to 2 things. First, at the top right, you'll see all the different definitions of sensitive data that you'll find in things like GDPR and other industries. So you have PI, which is personal information, then PII, personally identifiable information, but then you'll see PHI, Well, that's personal health information, which is completely vital in the healthcare, pharmaceutical industries, and anyone dealing with health information. So it was designed to cover all industries and all forms of sensitive data. And another point I would raise is that when we built this originally, and about 4 months before our release, we briefed several of the major regulators globally, and we received feedback because it was originally 12 controls. And you say, well, what did the team miss? They actually had two recommendations, regulators. Number one, you'll see control number 4, and it's data sovereignty and cross-border movement of data. That there's a hypersensitivity among regulators, especially for companies that do business across multiple jurisdictions, meaning multiple countries or states, that there are laws in some countries that say you cannot have data leave our country for certain scenarios or overall. So they were insisting that there must be a control that tracks that, enforces it, and creates the transparency to that. The other control that got added, and this came from regulators reviewing the framework, was the data control compliance. And you may say, well, what is that? It's the Uber control that makes sure all other 13 controls are operating and on and fully transcribing and transparently capturing this information for a company and its key executives. And here's why. Because the education we received from the regulators on this is that a proper control framework needs a control to assure the framework is always running. And so that was actually added in based on the input we received from regulators. So this is a phenomenal amount of work. And here's a headline for everyone listening in. This framework can be downloaded. It is absolutely free of charge for all companies to use. That QR code on the bottom right, you grab your cell phone and click on it. You can download it and immediately read this and apply it. It gives attribution, of course, to the council and people that help build this, but it's a free resource for all companies to use, and it covers all of these different functions. So that's what got built, Brian. And I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about how's this now been applied in the marketplace.
I would love to hear that, and also hear any notable implementations or case studies of companies that have implemented the CDMC framework.
Yeah. Well, it's a great story. So this is sort of the how to do cloud right and protect your data. And the nice part about this is that we had companies, to include Microsoft, and I'll tell everyone a little bit about this. The company that first jumped in and said, hey, what we'd like to do is take these controls, set up environments in Microsoft, AWS, and also Google Cloud was Snowflake. And they took their core product and a couple other partner products and set up an environment for each of the cloud environments to validate that they could implement all 14 controls. And they published that, and that was back in September. On the heels of that, and it took more time, AWS announced a capability as well, leveraging Glue and some of their components and partners as well. That was in December. And very notably, March of 2023, and kudos to the Microsoft team, because you did two things that were unique in this process. Of course, like the other companies, you helped build this framework, you sat at the same table, but you went to that next level where you have a native availability. In other words, all 14 key controls are available as part of Microsoft Azure and within the Purview capability. And this was also certified. In other words, you went to that next level, leveraging, at this point, I think it was Accenture and Avanade. They did an independent certification so that this is now certified and available for all Microsoft Azure customers to leverage in their operating environments. And kudos again, because you took the investment and time to assure this was built into your native offerings. Now, you asked a question about, how do people access this and what are the use cases? First, credit to Mike Flasco and his team. He's the VP and General Manager of Data Governance and Privacy Platform. That QR code opens up the list of resources that are available to direct any individual or their company to find out more about how to leverage this within the Microsoft environment. But the other part is that there's been, and you asked that question, use cases. We've been blessed that not only do companies volunteer their time to build the framework, they're now volunteering to share with the world, and they're, and both companies that they compete with and the companies that are their end customers, that they're now implementing CDMC. So here are some great examples. One is Ford Motor Credit. Keely, who's the Chief Data Officer, was one of the very first early adopters. Her comment was, hey, this became the CDMC framework is a blueprint that brought my chief information security officer, me as the CDO, the chief risk officer, head of compliance, all in the room with a common language on the things we needed to do to look at the full life cycle of data for our organization and assure we would have both the processes and the automations operational for our business. And she was very excited about how this moved the discussion quickly along, where in the past, there was each organization or each department had sort of a lens on what their concerns were. This brought the whole picture together and created a common language. Another example, by the way, British Telecom, one of the largest telephone and communications companies in the world. They had 50 people involved with working with the CDMC framework. They got trained on it. And by the way, there are training classes. You can visit the EDM Council website. They take either e-learning or open live classes on this. The second thing they did is they brought in one of the independent partners. So you're free to assess this on your own, download it and just use it yourself. But we do recommend that you attend training. And certainly at some point after you've done some investment in implementing the guidance of the CDMC framework, we do recommend that you bring in one of the authorized partners to assess and then certify your environment, because at the end, you want to have absolute confidence that these controls have been fully implemented. I like to give the analogy that if you're driving a car, you want to make sure the anti-lock brakes, the airbags, the crash detection is all operating. I don't think any of us would want to put our family in a car that doesn't have one of those features turned on. I think you want them all. And it's the same with the CDMC. So getting it certified at the end is what will give the highest confidence to you, your internal teams, and then your external stakeholders and so forth. So, Brian, many use cases. The first thing I would advocate is please download the framework. Absolutely avail yourself of the resources that Microsoft has invested into. It's still early days, so we're still educating and getting the word out. And if you have a friend in your business or a friend in another company, even though we've had lots of companies work on this, it's amazing. We're still having to go back to them and say, well, it's now ready. You can use this. And we still need the help to get the good word out.
Yeah, what would your recommendation be for Microsoft partners who have practices where they're helping customers implement these things?
Well, it's great. So if you're a consulting and advisory firm, you have an option to become an authorized partner with CDMC. So just reach out to the EDM Council website. We're a nonprofit, and we have programs for you to train your team and then have them carry this into the market. So we actually make that available for partners to use that do advisory work. So that's one option. And Brian, if your partner is a software provider, a cloud solution provider working with Microsoft Azure and your solution set, the second thing they can do is train their teams on this and also get their products certified against the CDMC controls. And how do you do that? Just reach out to us. We'll be happy to walk you through that program and as well introduce you to some of the partners that help with the certification process. Listen, we're a nonprofit. It doesn't mean everything is free, but it does mean we recognize this has to be done very effectively and efficiently. And that's what we hope to do. And at minimum, if you're a partner, Brian, I would say download the framework, read it, take a look at the resources that Microsoft has available. And that's a great starting point just to get the ball rolling. But if you'd like to bring in the Microsoft team or us to further describe how this can be leveraged by your firm as a partner firm to Microsoft, we're here to help do that.
That's excellent to know. How about future plans? So obviously a lot has changed even in the last 18 months or so.
There's something new,
There is.
You got to stay tuned. It's always changing. That's the only common. A couple things I can share. This is exciting. The team was so excited about this level of collaboration that they decided to stay together and keep going. So what you'll see here is that CDMC is the core framework that's released. It's about governance, operational, and data risk controls. But there's some very cool strategic capabilities that we're now working on as a collective on best practices for what we're calling CDMC Plus. So you'll see on this slide, on the left is the original framework. It's a fundamental, get that in place because you need that. It opens up all of your business use cases where you won't be taking risk. And it's not a lockdown thing, it's a enable your data. But here are the other areas that companies are working on best practices: cloud data analytics, cloud data marketplace, cloud data sharing, cloud data mastering. How do we create a federated architecture with data products that our business people do? We implement data mesh, approaches in our architectural strategy, so we can democratize data in our firm and allow it to be hyperscaled for generating business value. These areas we're now meeting on weekly, and if someone would like to be involved, it's a phenomenal team that includes the original companies and new companies that are joining in all the time. Just click on that QR code and you can get involved with the CDMC as well on the CDMC Plus side.
Yeah, so not too late to get involved then, right?
Absolutely. There's always more work, you know that.
Yeah. There's always something.
More good work, I like to say.
Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate all this information. This has been great. And I know we have some information that I will be putting up for other companies, for people who are watching this. What kind of resources should they just go to the EDM Council website?
Yeah, go to the EDM Council website. If you click on frameworks, you'll see the cloud framework is right at the top. The other thing you can do, we have training courses. So if you'd like to go to training on this, just start with the EDM Council website. And of course, as mentioned before on the prior slides, that if you want to get immediately access to some of the good work that Microsoft, and again, I really can't underscore how much good work Microsoft has put into this and treating it seriously as a real great resource for your end customers. This QR code will open up that door, and I would certainly reach out to your account executive and the teams you're working with, so we can connect the dots and make sure this good work is usable and helpful to your own company.
Well, Mike, thank you very much. This is you've been very gracious with your time. This has been fantastic information. I know it's going to be of use for a lot of the partners who are at various stages of getting a data governance and best practices implementation going. So thank you very much. And we're looking forward to hopefully being able to do some more videos with you and your team, diving into more specifics on CDMC Framework. So stay tuned for those. That will be coming soon. But in the meantime, I appreciate everyone for taking the time to join, and special thanks to Mike and everybody at the EDM Council who's been gracious with their time. It's appreciated. So until the next time, take care. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed learning about the EDM Council and the CDMC Framework. In the description below, we'll include links to webcasts and other resources that dive into the CDMC framework further. Visit the EDM Council's website for more information and to download the CDMC framework, but also consider getting involved in one of their working groups. We'll see you next time.